during this season. And we've been doing so to denounce white Christian nationalism and its threat to democracy, its threat to voting rights, its threat to the economy, and its threat to religious freedom in this country. You know, white Christian those who espouse to white Christian nationalist ideas have their roots deeply rooted in white supremacy culture and in anti-Semitism.
Right.
And we want to make sure we name those demonic forces.
That's right.
And say that we believe in a God who is more powerful than those demonic forces. I want to also say thank you to the Reverend Dr. Greg Carey. I'm going to introduce him now, and then I'm going to, but before he comes up, I'm going to have Reverend Forbes welcome you to this beautiful space, this sacred space. So let's have Reverend Forbes come first, and then I'll introduce Dr. Carey.
Good afternoon. Oh, good morning. I'm sorry. I'm so glad to have you here in the Ebenezer Sanctuary. We have a meal prepared at 12 o'clock. I know that the rumor was it's going to be sandwiches, but we actually run, one of our outreach programs is that we run a night shelter. We also run a couple of other things, but we feed every Wednesday. And it's open to not only those that are homeless, but those in the community. And so we average something like 400 to 500 meals every Wednesday. And we average on Thanksgiving Day, because we serve on Thanksgiving, anywhere from 1,000 to 1,500.
Wow.
So, my wife is the director of outreach for the church, and she decided that she wanted to give everyone a hot meal. So,
See what I'm saying? See what I'm saying?
So there's a meal prepared. There's a vegetarian option. The sanctuary, there's a handicapped restroom here. The other restrooms are located in the basement, two at the front, two at the back. If you need anything, just let us know. We try to be as accommodating as we possibly can. And there's always the temptation, Jason, when I see all these folks who pull out the offering plate. It always makes everybody nervous. No. But we want you to be comfortable. If you need anything, please just let us know. Welcome to Ebenezer.
Thank you.
I realize that I actually don't have sort of a proper introduction for Dr. Carey this morning. But Dr. Greg Carey is professor of New Testament at the Lancaster Theological Seminary. And the writer, the published writer of many books on the New Testament. And one in particular that I lift up that I appreciate is his book on the church's use of our outside voices and calling our attention to our role as those who are called to exercise prophetic imagination and our prophetic voices for justice in the public square. Dr. Carey has, for this season and for quite a number of years, been following this emerging movement of white Christian nationalism, both nationally and locally. And Greg has spoken in a variety of settings in this season. I think he's had probably several a week over the last several months. And some of you have already heard him in a couple of those settings. He was here in Lancaster at St. Peter's Lutheran Church. I think there were about 400 people that came out to hear Dr. Carey that night. And in fact, I know there are people here today who were there at that gathering and just wanted to hear you again. He's that good, y'all. You can't hear him once, you got to hear him twice. So, without further ado, I welcome Dr. Greg Carey. Greg.
wanted a real expert on this topic, you would have had to pay. So you got me. But I have been following white evangelicalism since I was in college. I wrote my honors thesis on it. And I've been troubled by the resurgence of white Christian nationalism for about 10 or 11 years, trying to follow the scholarship on it. And so I want to begin to describe it to you a little bit. Then to offer some thoughts from a Christian theological perspective, because in some ways it needs a response that is Christian. I don't mean to be exclusive in that way, but that's the terms that they understand the response. And then to talk about why white Christian nationalism specifically is a threat to common welfare in Pennsylvania, and how I recommend we could respond. This would be the time, Matt. Thank you. I like to use this image to help us think about what white Christian nationalism means and what it looks like. So you might remember the moment, it's the summer of 2020. George Floyd has been murdered by Minneapolis police, and Black Lives Matter protests are all over the country, including Lancaster. And then President Donald Trump wanted to suppress the protests. He made a speech, and then he had law enforcement use tear gas and other kinds of coercion to clear a path to St. John's Episcopal Church in Washington, where he led a delegation from the White House, held up this Bible in front of the church, didn't offer a speech, but just held up this Bible. What does this teach us about the nature of white Christian nationalism? Well, the issue is that the Bible and the church here are being used as props for political power. When I say they're being used as props, what I mean is, this wasn't Donald Trump's Bible. He didn't bring a Bible to the White House. They brought out like 9 different Bibles for him to choose one that felt good, that would be holy enough. It's famous, right, when he's been asked, what's your favorite book of the Bible? Your favorite? I like them all, like every good Bible reader says. The other thing I would add, as a former Southern Baptist, I've never seen anyone who reads the Bible hold it like that except for a priest in certain settings. And the bishop of the Diocese of Washington, D.C. said he wasn't welcome here, they never asked. So that's what I mean by using these symbols of Christianity as props to align himself as the powerful defender of Christian order. And a lot of y'all know, and you're waiting and wondering if I'm going to get there, and it's white power, right? Because these are the Black Lives Matter protests that he wants to suppress. And so he's using the church and the Bible to stress his power as a defender of white order. When I think about white Christian nationalism in that way, what is it? At one level, scholars wouldn't define it this way, but it is an attempt to use Christianity as a weapon to promote a narrow political agenda. White Christian nationalists say they speak for Christianity, for biblical values. And I would just point out, here we are, right? Obviously, they don't speak for most Jewish communities, Buddhists, Muslims, etc. But even Christians, if you look at the social teaching of the Roman Catholic Church, the Episcopal Church, most Baptists, not Southern Baptists, Presbyterians, Lutherans, United Church of Christ disciples, are far out of order from what is being promoted by white Christian nationalists. So they don't speak for Christianity in that way. Thank you. Man, did you see that? He's a step ahead of me. But right on time. Technically, you would define Christian nationalism as the belief that God has established a particular relationship with the United States and blesses the United States in a special way and wants special things from us. And so therefore the United States should declare itself as a Christian nation and govern itself this is where it gets sticky, according to Christian principles, biblical worldview, so forth. For Christians, the issue here is which Christian worldview are we exactly talking about? And I'm going to hint at one place where I'm going to head in a little bit. If you look at public opinion polling that identifies supporters of Christian nationalism, you will find that their opinions on social and political issues are the farthest away from those of black Christians. No two groups. And for those of us who are white Christians of any stripe, we need to confess that the more white people go to church, the farther our opinions get from black believers. So maybe we need to take a look at what we're all doing. With that said, here's Michael Flynn. He was Donald Trump's first national security advisor, retired general, confessed to having conversations with the Russians and lying about it, was convicted, pardoned. And he was in Lancaster County last month at a large rally out at Spooky Nook, and he said, if we're not there, but previously, if we're going to have one nation under God, which we must, we have to have one religion, one nation under God, and one religion under God. If you ask a lot of Christians, would you like America to be more Christian? A lot of us would say, that sounds good to me, right? There have been many moments in the history of this country where Christians have tried to say, Christianity calls us to this kind of national life. That would apply to defenders of slavery. It would apply to abolitionists who were trying to end slavery. It would apply to the socially progressive social gospel movement. It would apply to Father Coughlin and his 1930s kind of Nazi movement called the Christian Front, all the way through. It's a fraught question, and if you're interested in that history, I recommend John Thea, who teaches at Messiah College and is nationally respected for his Was America Founded as a Christian Nation? His argument is, it's complicated. Right? So let's imagine, like Pilgrims in Massachusetts. Yes, they were trying to found a Christian society. What about the Baptists who ran away to Rhode Island because the Pilgrims were persecuting them? So they did a different thing. What about the Reformed in New York? What about the Catholics in Maryland? What about the Quakers in Pennsylvania? What about the Anglicans in the South, who by and large were there for the money in the first place and were pretty open about it? It's just complicated. But the wave of Christian nationalism we're facing now, and has been emerging for 70 years or so, uses the language of dominion. That Christians should take dominion or exercise dominion over society. One of the movements that has tens of millions of adherents in the United States, but when I do this talk, very few people know they're around, is on the edges of the Pentecostal charismatic movement called the New Apostolic Reformation. And this is what was going on at the convention at Spooky Nook a couple of weeks ago. They developed the doctrine that Christians should take dominion over the 7 mountains of culture: business, government, family, religion, media, education, entertainment. And they mean that. When you think about it, that means it is inherently anti-democratic, right? Dominion. One group and its agenda in that way. At that meeting at Spooky Nook, one of the preachers had this to say about politicians who don't align with them. Thank you, Matt. He said the angel of death is coming for them. These people are going down. These people who control the world think they're the pharaohs, present-day pharaohs. Soon you, speaking to them, shall never see again. This is coming with the greatest, it gets weird, wealth transfer in human history. Gold and silver are going to explode in value, giving wealth to the church, to you. And if you listen to the audio, folks are going nuts about this.
Yeah.
Thousands of them. That God's going to punish their political enemies and make them rich and powerful. Let's think about this movement theologically. This is the moment of the presentation that is specifically Christian. If you pay close attention to the preaching and speaking and writing of white Christian nationalists, to them, Jesus is a symbol. He's a label on your shirt, hood ornament on your car, maybe a flag you wave or a sticker you put on the back. They never talk about, well, what did Jesus talk about? This whole love God, love your neighbor thing. What did Good Samaritan? Rich man and Lazarus, blessed are the peacemakers, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for justice. Right? Those things are not, what about feeding everybody, healing everybody, traveling and building community? What about those characteristic activities that we see laid out in the gospel and practiced by his followers through the rest of the New Testament? What they want to talk about is wedge issues, culture wars, are trans kids getting to go to the bathroom of their choice? Right? Are they teaching critical race theory in school? And you know, because I've been using critical race theory in my New Testament research for about 10 years. I know what it is. I promise you none of those people know what it is.
Right.
What they mean is
Right.
talking about race in an honest way is a part of our culture and history. Right? Anti-LGBT, anti-racial justice, anything that is divisive. And I've been getting like the school fundraising magazine for a local Christian school for a while. If they don't know, don't tell them. Never, how do you become a more loving person?
Right.
Never, how do you practice mercy? Never,
Right.
how do you know God better?
No.
Wedge issues.
Right.
Wedge issues. They want dominion, not love.
Yeah.
They neglect what Jesus called the weightier matters of the law. Because after all, Jesus was saying what other Jews were saying. And of course, they claim to speak for all Christians when they so obviously don't speak for most. But again, what is powerful and deceptive about their message is, and I've heard this a million times, well, don't you want a Christian society? If you're Christian, it sounds a certain way, right? Until you begin to ask, well, what do you mean by that? How does that play out? I want to get into some of the data that sociologists have developed by testing through survey questions that are publicly available how strongly people's beliefs align with Christian nationalism, and then measuring that on a scale according to different issues in our society. The researchers who are most prominent in this way happen to be white evangelicals who are so upset about what has happened to their own tradition. Okay? So that's something we want to keep track of. Right? That there are people who have labels that some of us might feel a certain way about right now who are trying to do good work. But Samuel Perry and Andrew Whitehead, who wrote Taking America Back for God, and there's a bibliography I have with me if you want to ask later, have found that as they look through these things, that the more people align with Christian nationalism, the more they move away from conventional measures of what religious commitment leads people to believe. It's a remarkable thing, and we'll track down what some of that is in a minute. But also Robert P. Jones of the Public Religion Research Institute, who I assigned this book for one of our classes at school, White Too Long, The Legacy of White Supremacy in American Christianity. And the book is as hot as the title. Jones writes that one of the most remarkable, consistent findings in the contemporary data is the chasm, what I was just mentioning, between two groups who otherwise share both geographic proximity and a common evangelical religious orientation, black Protestants and white evangelical Protestants. The gap, people who share the same theology, theoretically, ask them what they think about God, the Bible, Jesus, the church, the Holy Spirit, and they would agree. What do you think about our life together? And they couldn't be farther apart. So, this is going to happen a little quick. Folks who measure strongly with Christian nationalism are more likely to approve of authoritarian tactics like demanding that people show respect for national symbols and traditions. Can anyone say Colin Kaepernick? Right. They're more likely to fear and distrust religious minorities, including Muslims, atheists, and Jewish people. They're more likely, we're going to see a slide in a minute that's terrifying, more likely to condone police violence toward black Americans and distrust black people when they say there's racial inequality in the criminal justice system. They're more likely to believe that racial inequality is due to the personal shortcomings of minority groups. This is a question that shows up in what sociologists call the racism index, the ways they can measure racism in the society. They're more likely, here's another one, more likely to report being very uncomfortable with interracial marriage and transracial adoption. They're more likely than any other religious group to hold anti-immigrant views. One question, they give a statement, do you agree or disagree? If you said, do you agree that immigrants are invading our country and replacing our cultural and ethnic background? In other words, do you think immigrants are a cultural threat? There are your white evangelicals on the top. Right. By the way, there's your white mainline Protestants next. They're more likely to fear refugees, which is weird. That wasn't true just a few years ago. Right? They're more likely to oppose scientists and science education in schools. Think about vaccines. Think about, in Elizabethtown, Pennsylvania, a campaign within the school board to eliminate the teaching of science.
Whoa.
Dawn.
Wow.
So why, besides those attitudes, how do they boil into a threat? Well, white Christian nationalism is a threat to democracy. I don't expect you to be able to read the stuff on this chart. I want you to see the line, right? So for Whitehead and Perry, the number on the right, 24, is someone who, in every measure of Christian nationalism, that's who they are. And 0 is, that's who they're not. And the question that they were measuring is, do you view voting as a privilege rather than a right? And you see it, right? Christian nationalism is almost a straight line up. The more people align with Christian nationalism, the more likely they are to think you're not entitled to vote.
Right.
Public Religion Research Institute. 54% of white evangelicals believe the election was stolen, which is about twice as much as that opinion holds in the general population, including them. A sociologist at Vanderbilt, I always mention Vanderbilt when I can, named Larry Bartels, did a survey of Republicans' commitment to democracy. And it's hard not to be partisan in talking about some of these things, but that's not my aim. 50.7% of the Republicans he surveyed, thousands of them, agreed that the traditional American way of life is disappearing so fast we may have to use force to save it. 41%. A time will come when patriotic Americans have to take the law into their own hands. 47%. Strong leaders sometimes have to bend the rules in order to get things done. Directly anti-democratic outlook directly, if we can't win the fair way, we'll have to fight our way to a win. Right. And this is what we're seeing. This is why democracy is so much in threat in the United States. Why our friends in other peer democracies are worried about us and not sure they can rely on us. Because they see this potential. And let's just say, political violence is not new in the United States.
That's true.
Yeah.
But it is rising rapidly. Robert Jones again. This is a little bit wordy, so I'll break it down. White Americans who agree that, quote, this is a Christian nationalist question. God intended America to be a promised land for European Christians. Thank you. Are 4 times as likely as those who disagree to believe that, quote, true American patriots may have to resort to violence in order to save our country. That's how strongly white Christian nationalism correlates with these anti-democratic views. White Christian nationalism is also a threat to education. This goes way back into the 50s, by the way. Before Jerry Falwell, the first source I can identify for this opinion is a guy named R.J. Rushdoony. I just didn't have time. But he did happen to be a segregationist. So was Jerry Falwell, who said, I hope to see the day when we don't have public schools. The churches will have taken them over, and Christians will be running them. When you get a white Christian nationalist as Secretary of Education, what does that mean? Because we have one. And when you hear all these arguments for freedom in education and so forth, what's under it? What's under it is an attempt to end public education. Right? Don't buy that it's something other than that.
That's right.
Because that's what it is.
That's right.
In our current gubernatorial campaign in Pennsylvania, one candidate wants to end property taxes. How do we fund education in Pennsylvania? Oh, property taxes. So then what he says he wants to do is give money to parents rather than schools. You can immediately, especially if you've been associated with power for any amount of time, immediately get the racial implications. You immediately get that they're trying to steer Christians into schools that indoctrinate them in a certain kind of Christian doctrine. You immediately get the idea that this is even bad for business, right? If you're not taking care of kids' health and education, what kind of society are you going to have in just a little while? But that is literally the plan. Also on that person's website, so-and-so believes that parents have a fundamental right to know and control what their children are learning in school. And I think about my mom, who was a public school, high school English teacher. And if she had 150 kids in a year, and all those parents are saying, no, you can't assign that book. I don't want my child to read that book. Right? You couldn't have education. So what they're trying to do, and watch what's happening in the Elizabethtown Public School District, Enfield Public School District, Manhattan Township, they are trying to foment chaos. That is the goal, chaos. They're a threat to democracy. It's a threat to education. It's a threat to our investment in society and the safety net. So this is one of those charts that you can't read. But on the left, the question is, do you agree that we demonize the wealthy too much? White evangelicals are very concerned that we demonize the wealthy too much. If you want to find that little bitty 13%, that would be black Christians, right? But if you ask the question, are most poor people poor because of circumstances beyond their control? The white evangelicals are much less concerned. There's the white and the black bar for black Protestants, right? You see on issues of public welfare that split by race and religion. By the way, whites who don't go to church are much closer. to black Christian opinion on that. If you ask the question, do you agree that generations of slavery and discrimination still hinder black Americans' economic mobility? Whiting and Joe, it's 19%.
Yeah.
Black Protestants, 78%. So, are we willing to invest in everyone's welfare? Finally, criminal justice. This is the slide I said is terrifying. This is one of those, how strongly do you measure as a Christian nationalist on other questions, from left to right? So there's that straight line going up, right, and to the right. Do you think the death penalty is used often enough? In other words, the wording is, one of the biggest problems with the death penalty is we don't use it often enough. So what would that mean for policing? What would it mean for brutality? What would it mean for sentencing? What would it mean for opportunities for people who get off the path? What would it mean for any chance to catch up in this society? There you are. And I published an article years ago. I want to challenge some of you. I'm off script saying this. Forgive me. If you think that you should get hurt for doing something wrong, that that's the proper response to someone doing something wrong, how does that bear on other parts of your theology?
Right, exactly.
Okay. How would I recommend we respond? Bring it. Guard your souls. This is a hard time. It is stressful to face threats like this. It's triple stressful if you're the target of threats like this. Guard your soul. Try to keep it soft. Practice love. Find love. Practice your spiritual discipline. That's going to sound in tension with be alert. Educate yourself. Follow the news. Most of the time when I do this presentation, folks say, I didn't know that. You know, I heard about it, but I didn't know that. Well, yeah, because I'm a nerd and I'm just obsessed by this. But maybe we all need to be a little alert and oriented at this season in our society.
Yeah. Say it.
Because the threat is so direct to democracy and public welfare, it is time to organize and win.
Yes.
We have to think about winning. We don't have time to not. And if you're tired right now, you can take a rest in a week or so, and then get back at it, because it's not going away.
That's right. Yeah.
But organizing and winning. And then finally, what about that person I know that I care about that is always throwing this stuff at me and they won't listen to anything I say? And when I got a vaccine, they made fun of me. And I drive a Prius and they laugh. Well, that happened to my wife. Anyway, treat people as people.
Yeah.
Right? That doesn't mean that you have to put up with abuse. It doesn't mean you have to tolerate all kinds of foolishness. But you do know by now that you're not going to win an argument with somebody
All right.
who is set in a certain way. What I would recommend you do, I've been studying this a little bit in my own tradition and especially in black church tradition. Testify. What do you believe? What kind of society do you want to live in? Say it in the mirror, say it to the people you love, say it over. Just testify, don't argue. I want to live in a society where everyone has an equal voice.
Yeah.
Say it. I want to live in a society where every child gets a quality education. I want to live in a society where we leave this planet better than we got it right now, which is going to be hard to do, right? I want to live in a society where benefits are shared and we see one another not as enemies, but as fellow humans that we care about. I want to live in that kind of world because I'm a person of faith, and this is what I want. Just testify to it. Don't argue for it.
Yes.
Don't get in the weeds. But guard your soul and speak to that. That's right. Thank you, guys.
dismissed for lunch. Obviously, as an organizer and as part of Power Under Faith, number 3, organize and win, is really important to us. And we have to find a way to come together to dismantle systemic racism, and which is, Christian nationalism, as I said before, rooted in that. And just a story about why we need to organize. So I live in the Warwick School District. I have 3 sons. One of them just graduated. He's going to Dickinson College. Go Red Devils. He's a political science and religion major. I guess he never got the memo that the 2 things you ought not to talk about in public are politics and religion. Go figure. I don't know where he got it from. But my other sons, go to Warwick, and they're in the high school, and it's a predominantly majority white school district, dramatically so. And for about a year, a little over a year now, maybe a year and a half, the Warwick school board meetings have been places of threat and chaos. Greg talked about E-Town and a couple of others. The Warwick school board meetings have been really places of threat and chaos. And there's a group that, actually it's more than one group, but it's in particular a group called Moms for Liberty, and they are nationally organized, but they have people organized here in Lancaster, and they bring people to every school board meeting, and they just come there to basically seek to disrupt and undermine every decision that the school board is attempting to make. Any decision at all gets disrupted and questioned and scrutinized. And this last meeting was particularly painful to see and to hear because there are people who are insinuating really malicious thoughts about LGBTQ students. And one of the things that's been suggested by some folk is including teachers and faculty and school psychologists, is that there need to be books. Students need to be able to access books that they can identify themselves in. And there are folks who have been coming to meetings that want to ban those books. And one of the reasons why certain folks want to make sure that there are books that reflect the identity and representation of certain students, especially students who feel perhaps marginalized or are questioning their own sense of identity and belonging as an adolescent whose sexuality is emerging and changing. And there are studies that suggest that LGBTQ plus youth experience issues of mental health and suicidal ideation at a much higher rate than other kids. And it was insinuated at the last Warwick School Board meeting that to suggest that the elimination of a book would cause a kid to think about suicide is preposterous. And at every one of those meetings there are scripture is weaponized by folks. Every one of these school board meetings, a public school board meeting, scripture is weaponized to ostensibly suggest that the school board members and the public school and the community that supports it are all going to hell. And I have some friends that have been showing up at those meetings and speaking out at those meetings to protect public education for about a year and a half. And they keep reaching out to faith leaders in the community, and they keep getting rebuffed. I haven't been paying enough attention, one of my colleagues said. I hear that this is an issue, but I don't want to get involved because I don't want to divide my congregation. Well, guess what? Some of us in the faith community, some of us faith leaders are going to have to stand up and speak, even if it ends up dividing us and causing some people to leave. I think we're going to have to take that seriously. I also want to point to guard your soul. And in this moment, I feel like what I want to do with us before we go to lunch is just take a moment, a spirit moment, a soul moment. We've been in action this morning, down in public action, down in the city, at the county government office. We've just heard this amazing presentation that's calling us to action, right?
Yep.
But as people of faith, I think we're also we need to dwell together in this moment in solidarity with each other, in union with each other, in unity with each other. The unity of the Spirit that is the bond of peace. We believe that the Hebrew word for breath, ruach, the Greek word for spirit or breath, pneuma, indicates something, that we are all spiritual beings because we breathe in the breath of life. And we share that breath. We've just come out of a time when it was really not so good to share breathing space. But we do. We share this breath of life. And so I'd like us to take a moment to center ourselves in this sacred space. Maybe to shut your eyes, to breathe in and out slowly a few times.
Matt, can I add something to that? Part of the narrative, I think, in doing this, coming out of this, is we're watching a violent attack against faith and faith believers. Kanye West situation in terms of our Jewish brothers and sisters. Yesterday I got to my office at about 9:15 and was talking to financial secretary, and she grabbed a mail and she simply said, "What's this, Pastor?" And I said, "I don't know." She opened it up and we got a hate-threatening white supremacist letter.
Whoa.
About voting. I said I'm going to read it Sunday because I like reading stuff like that. Yeah. But essentially it talked about that we are aligning ourselves with pedophiles and with all kinds of stuff. And that the end result for black Christians is that we're going to end up slaves and dead.
Well.
We're watching preachers no longer deal with the concept that now abides faith, hope, love, but the greatest of these is love. And so while we're dealing with our souls, I think that there also has to be a focus on our healing. Because a lot of people are confused about where do we go from here. Because there's a defining of our faith that's antithetical to who we really are.
Yeah. Thanks, brother. Calling us to a healing moment. What we're experiencing now can be traumatizing to some, painful. It can disgust us to see what we see. A lot of white folk get shocked and surprised by some of the things that we see. We ought not to be, given the history, but unfortunately we are. Greg said also this needs to be a time in which we are vigilant, awake, alert, aware, and calling our neighbors to alertness and awareness. Because many of us live in a state of denial about what's going on. Many of my colleagues are in kind of denial that there's a problem. But I think healing is a really important piece of this work. And for me, the community is healing. The interfaith community is healing. The multiracial community is healing. Being together, fighting together, standing for love and justice together. These are healing acts. So let's just take a moment. I'm going to dismiss you for lunch in 30 seconds. Let's just take a moment to breathe. Come and fill our hearts with your peace. You alone, O Lord, are holy. Come and fill our hearts with your peace. Hallelujah. Come and fill our hearts with your peace. You alone, O Lord, are holy. Come and fill our hearts with your peace. Hallelujah. Come and fill our hearts with your peace. You alone, O Lord, are holy. Come and fill our hearts with your peace. Hallelujah. So we're going to enjoy this wonderful lunch that has been prepared for us by the good folk here at Ebenezer Baptist Church. Can I invite you to pray with me? Let us pray. God of mercy, God of love, God of all creation, everything you have made is yours. And you give us the fruit of it in due season. You satisfy the desire of every living thing, providing food and shelter and all that is needed for life. Bless the food, O God, that we are about to receive. May it remind us of the labor of love that has prepared it. And may we give thanks for that. For all of those who labored to give us this food. And for your abundance. Send your Spirit upon this gathering today. In the faces of one another, may we see your face. The face of love. The face of mercy. The face of generosity and joy. Amen. So we're going downstairs.
Yes, there are